interlude, and now we continue. But before starting the next section, I would like to give the floor to the rapporteurs that very briefly will kind of give us the gist of the 3 roundtables that took place. So without further ado, I give the floor to Javier for the first roundtable.
Thanks, Emanuela. Reporting on the Americas session, and as a quick overview, actually, we have seen several experiences related to public policies in research and innovation. The speakers also issue that in some countries there are problems. For example, the productivity gap in Canada. There is a lack of focus or generalist focus in Brazil. The need to learn and connect with other regions within and outside the country in Mexico, for example. And within these problems, smart specialization appears as a part of the solution. So basically, it was highlighted the inclusiveness process of smart specialization, the capacity to establish dialogue between different stakeholders, and its bottom-up character. So more concretely, we have seen in the Americas session, for example, the case of Mexico, which are a specific domain of specialization and strength, which is driven by the port of Manzanillo, for example, and derives to the issue of specializing, for example, in logistics. Many other specializations, but is about that, to identify the potential of a territory and striving to a smart specialization process. At the same time, the process was not finished. There are some issues at national level that should be addressed more subnational action. In the case of Brazil, I would mention that it can be summarized in a word. It's a laboratory. It has allowed to test smart specialization and to derive to the discussion of customization process or not. But we've seen some collaboration with EU partners in the framework of specific projects. As for the case of Canada, we've seen also the example of how research and research activity and institutions can help, for example, in modeling or in finding some prospects in the dynamics of smart specialization between regions, and also as a tool to interconnect economies. Finally, Mr. Tyson mentioned the European Commission action giving framework and establishing cooperation between EU and Americas. And that is what we have seen. Lessons as a second aspect here in this session. I would highlight 3 lessons. The first one is silos breaking approach. This silos breaking approach, we have seen that in the case of Brazil, in which ministries of integration and innovation are talking together thanks to a smart specialization concept. Second, a smart specialization concept beyond EU allows to approach different territorial units. It's not just regions, but for example, Brazil with Brasilia 2060 project is addressing smart specialization at city level. Canada shows us how smart specialization would be implemented in metropolitan areas. So that is an evolution of the concept. And finally, that is necessary to strengthen availability of information and data and to engage private sector. And finally, I will finish with perspectives, challenges, and opportunities, in which 4 main aspects to highlight here. So the first one is customize or not customize? That is the question. We engage in an interesting discussion, but I think that what is clear is that we have to preserve some core elements of the smart specialization concept, as for example, the inclusiveness of the process, to grant more the process actually than the strategy as a document per se. And there are some elements that the smart specialization concept as such allows, for example, flexibility process or adaptation to different socioeconomic contexts. Second, clusters. It was highly mentioned, the relation with clusters in Latin America and as well, for example, in Canada and the United States. The relation on how clusters would drive or would be a good ally of smart specialization and vice versa in these dynamics to interrelate several specializations. Thirdly, governance as a key aspect. Governance should be preserved and should be the core element of smart specialization wherever and whenever be implemented or some when there is some initiatives related to this intention. And the smart specialization as finally as an element to help framing collaboration at a higher level. That is the EU CELAC framework, for example, putting innovation at the center of the discussion. And currently happening with Latin American community, but why not, suggested by Mr. Charles Wesner with, for example, United States and Canada. So that is the summary of the session.
Thank you, Javier. For the second roundtable on Asia and Oceania, Alban, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. So in our world tour on smart specialization, our second stop was in Asia and Oceania to understand to what extent smart specialization is being applied or could inspire countries on these continents in the near future. And the extremely constructive exchanges held during this session have clearly shown the rich palette of smart specialization developments across the world. For Australia, Bruce Wilson spoke about the importance of identifying the competitive advantages of territories, but also of connecting and linking actors together as the key merits of smart specialization. While Theresa Mathawapan, representing Thailand, emphasized the importance of place-based innovation in Thailand to build successful innovation ecosystems. And this idea was reflected as well in the very telling words from Inga Mitkandal, who emphasized the promising nature of smart specialization worldwide, but also the potential for Europe to bring back some lessons from the rest of the world. In a nutshell, bringing together Australia, which has been one of the precursors on smart specialization worldwide, bringing together also Thailand, where similarities or elements of smart specialization have fed into the innovation policy, and some perspectives about India as well, has represented a triple opportunity. First, the opportunity to confirm our diagnosis that smart specialization does not only have an added value at a European level, but also at a global scale, and notably in this session for Asia and Oceania. Second, the opportunity to showcase the potentials as well as the challenges of pursuing a smart specialization type of method in localizing innovation policies. And third, the opportunity to shed light on possible synergies, complementarities, and future cooperations between countries in Asia and Oceania, which may have different economic, political, or social contexts, but share a common interest in improving their research and innovation fabric, possibly through smart specialization. Thank you.
Thank you, Alban. For the third roundtable on Africa, Ilenia Cimarrusi.
Thank you. So the presentation of the Africa panel shows us that there are ongoing discussions, reflections on the national innovation plans across the African countries which have been represented in the workshop today. These initiatives and frameworks are also, in some cases, associated with country-specific plans and instruments. It is the case of Rwanda, for example, which has been developing science, technology, and innovation policies since 2006. And these innovation policies are being revised at the moment. These policies recognize the importance of innovation to improve the economy of the country, but also acknowledge the existence of challenges like the fact that Africa is a newcomer in science and technology development, and Africa has a low industrial base in some cases, but also try to identify some instruments to face these challenges. We also saw the case of South Africa with the white paper, which tries to valorize the role of science and innovation across the ministries for them to contribute to the country innovation agenda, and also the very positive case of regional cooperation with the SADC. And then we had a long list of very interesting experience of cases of Tunisia, So all these initiatives show a very varied landscape of country strategies which try to integrate smart specialization concept. And in this very varied landscape of innovation strategies, there are some paths and approaches which seems very relevant to, appear to be very relevant to set up pilot projects on smart specialization, so collaboration on smart specialization. These include the methodologies for mapping, so the identification of methodologies for mapping the existing initiative on innovation and smart specialization, and the methodology for entrepreneurial discovery processes, which are meant to support countries in identifying and implementing priority innovation domains and activities. And also, there are some important conditions which need to be developed in order to set up collaboration pilots. And these are place-based leadership and interest, and also we saw through, thanks to the colleague of South Africa, targeted fundings are very important in order to create an enabling environment which in turn contribute to improve the quality of life and reduce poverty. And also another important element is the coordination with the existing EU policies and the new Africa-EU agenda for a renewed partnership. Thanks.
Thank you, Lenia. Alban?
Thank you, Manuela. So as a way of conclusion, overall, two inspiring messages emerge from the three roundtables on the Americas, Asia, Oceania, and Africa. First, interestingly, the roundtables have highlighted a number of common issues of interest across continents. And this is the case of regional innovation, regional development, and regional identity. These issues are clearly transversal. And this clearly demonstrates the relevance of building a smart specialization worldwide community, as was mentioned by Luis Delgado this morning. And also this could pave the way for further dialogue and cooperations under the umbrella of smart specialization. And second, in a world marked by a high diversity, where one-size-fits-all policies cannot function effectively, one of the merits of smart specialization is to tailor research and innovation policies to national, regional, and local contexts. And this makes smart specialization fully malleable to all countries and all territories. A bit like a universal recipe where the core ingredients are given, but where each country can add extra elements linked to its taste or its identity. And this is why smart specialization holds all the trumps to feature on the EU agenda for international relations. And this will be the topic of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the three of you.
Thank you.
So this saves me the effort of summing up anything. I would like to invite to the podium the speakers for the session. Thank you very much, which I will introduce while you join me. Manfredo Fanti, head of division for the Americas in the External Action Service. Please find your name. Robert Burmancher, head of the Knowledge, Statistics and Data Hub unit in DG International Cooperation and Development. Nona Depré, here she is. Head of the Partnership Instrument Unit in the Service for Foreign Policy Instruments, FPI, and Marek Pszaur, more or less, from DG Regional and Urban Policy. So, representatives of the institutions, very happy you're here. What we are looking forward to hearing from you is a little bit to bring back the concept of smart specialization in today's policies and EU action, having heard up to now the great potential of smart specialization in economic terms, social terms, innovation terms, but also the great variety of how this tool is or could be used around the world. So a lot of food for thought for the colleagues and the guests who are here to learn from each other, but also for us institutions to be enriched in our thinking by these very valuable and I find also candid experiences that were presented here. So with that, Alfredo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuela, and good afternoon to all. I would like to introduce, I am responsible for the regional affairs in the European External Action Service for the Americas. And together with the organizers of this seminar, we thought that it might be useful to offer a wider context of the relations between the European Union and the Americas, but particularly Latin America and the Caribbean, also in order to identify the future opportunities for the work in the area of smart specialization, because this is certainly something which is going to contribute to the future of the development of the relations with the region. The External Action Service, as you probably most of you know, is responsible for the coordination of external relations of the European Union. Its boss is Federica Mogherini, the High Representative, but clearly all these external relations cannot happen and cannot be managed without close cooperation with all the other Directorate Generals of the Commission, which provided the substance to many of the relations that we have with all over the world, and particularly also with Latin America and the Caribbean. So I've prepared just a few pictures to show a little bit what are the relations between the European Union, Latin America, and the Caribbean. First of all, we are speaking about relations between 61 countries, 28 of the European Union and 33 of Latin America and the Caribbean, which goes for 1/3 of the United Nations members and 8 seats in the G20. In these relations, there is also a very important human dimension. There are around 6 million people who live on each side of the Atlantic while not being originally from Europe. This means that there are Europeans in Latin America and the Caribbean and people from Latin America and the Caribbean who work and contribute to the economies of Europe. So a very intense exchange. And we always have with the countries of the region very close positions on important political multilateral issues. We cooperate very closely between the European Union and the region on important subjects such as climate change, for instance, but also issues like human rights, rights of the child, death penalty. There is therefore a political closeness between the two regions. If we look at the economic data, that becomes really very interesting, and we are getting closer to the issue that we are discussing today, because Latin America and the Caribbean represent 5.9% of the total trade of the European Union, and it is our 5th largest trade partner. By contrast, the European Union is the 3rd largest trade partner of Latin America and the Caribbean, and we have free trade agreements with 26 countries of the region out of 33. This means that the trade with 26 of these countries has been completely liberalized, and there are no customs duties, and goods can freely circulate. Clearly, this provides a lot of advantages for business people, because it provides something like predictability on the market, economic growth, and also dynamics for export and import. Also because these trade agreements are very often accompanied in their implementation by supporting measures in order to fully implement their potential. If we look at the foreign direct investment, this is also quite meaningful, because the EU is by far the first investor in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2016, the stock of European investments in Latin America and the Caribbean was 826 billion euros. And this is just to give a rough idea, more than what the European Union invests in Russia, China, and India combined. So just to give the dimension of the importance of the economic relations between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean. And also another meaningful element, and again we go close to the smart specialization, is usually European investments bring with them technology. They are technology relevant in the areas like, for instance, renewable energy, telecom and digital economy and research. But what is also maybe less known is that investments from Latin America and the Caribbean into the European Union are also extremely significant. If we look at the figures, 250 billion is the stock of coming from that region to the European Union, out of which 97.3 from Brazil only. The bi-regional cooperation has various sectors. It has been agreed in a document that has the title of EU CELAC Action Plan, where there are 10 chapters. One of these chapters, actually the first one, is science, research, innovation and technology. So this gives the importance, that explains the importance that we give to the sector of cooperation, and the others you can see on the screen. So we have identified wide areas of cooperation in which we have various degrees of cooperation by means of dialogue, by means of exchange of experience, but also by means of projects funded by the European Union or co-funded with our partners. Some figures about that. The European Union is the largest provider of development cooperation to Latin America and the Caribbean. In the period between 2014 and 2020, the amount of grants to the region was 3.6 billion euros in various different sectors. The European Investment Bank, in the period between 2014 and 2017, assigned loans for 2.3 billion euros, and those loans go to infrastructure, go to small and medium enterprises, to various kind of activities. So it's an extremely meaningful part of our partnership. And of course, but my colleague of the JRTD today already explained the importance of research. Research is playing an important role in our relations. I would even say a growing importance. And maybe the last point is about humanitarian assistance. We are very present also in terms of solidarity when there are problems in the partner countries. And over the last 20 years, the European Union provided over 1.2 billion of humanitarian assistance. With regard to trade, without being too long in the presentation, I would simply like to underline that the free trade agreement that we have signed with the countries still have a lot of potential which has not been used. And here you see on the screen some of which would be probably the next steps in our trade relations with the region, such as the full implementation and improvement of the free trade agreements which are in force, the implementation of the WTO trade facilitation agreement, and also clearly supporting the regional economic integration in Latin America, and other cooperation on areas such as the rules of origin for products, the investment protection agreements, and also actions to support the implementation of the agreements. So that is certainly a part that is playing a very important role in our relations. Clearly, we have certain political priorities in the relations with Latin America and the Caribbean, and you can see them there. So the first one is to finalize negotiation with Mercosur. It's not a secret that it is a very complex negotiation with many different interests at stake. So this negotiation has been pending now for some time, but its potential is clearly there. It's a matter to find the opportunity and the political will to conclude it. To modernize the two already existing agreements with Chile and Mexico, which are quite important. To implement the political dialogue and cooperation agreement with Cuba, which is in terms of time the last one that we concluded with one country of the region, And clearly, other important priorities for us are the full implementation of the peace process in Colombia that the European Union is supporting. This is important also for the future economic development of the country, of course, because it will give stability. Addressing the situation in Venezuela, which is at the moment very complicated and is giving rise to a number of problematic issues in economically, socially, and with a direct impact on the countries of the region. And clearly, the partnership with the region as a whole, with the CELAC, which has been mentioned this morning, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean Countries. There are also other regional integration processes, such as the Pacific Alliance, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico, very important and very promising, the Caribbean Community, and the Central American Integration System. And what are the issues that I have already partially addressed, that we see as challenges today? The full implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, the situation, the latest developments in Nicaragua and Venezuela. So that is a very broad picture of the relations with the region, and I thank you very much for your attention. But before concluding that, I would like to say one thing, that we are clearly evolving in our relations between the region, the European Union, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We used to have a cooperation that was based mainly on trade and development cooperation. The situation in the region is changing very quickly. We are moving into a different model, which is a model based on investments, international cooperation, exchange of expertise, and research and innovation, so much more diversified, much more peer-to-peer, and this is the moment when issues like smart specialization will play a very important role in the development of the future economic opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive view on relations only on one region. Now I would like to give the floor to Robert. You don't have a presentation, I believe.
No, I will give you an oral presentation. Just by way of background, let me just introduce myself, because I'm a little bit double-hatted at your event today, because of the fact that I managed for years different units in research and innovation, and only since 2 years DEFCO, so Development Cooperation. And the background is that I used to run the International Cooperation Program in RTD. I was 2 times head of the Americas division. I also dealt with regional cooperation in Europe, etc., etc. So I have a bit of grasp on what is being presented by JRC today. Compliments, by the way, on the program, because you've structured it in a way that you get the geographical attention and the support level that you have in mind or what you have applied. And I particularly like actually the subtitle of the seminar, which is From the EU to the World. I don't know how long you've thought about that, but it has some implications. So just to come to DEFCO, where I had been asked by the Director General there, Stefano Manservisi, to take care of the coordination of research and innovation programs for ACP on the one hand, and to do the coordination with my team. I'm not doing that on my own, of course. The coordination with respect to the big programs that are operated by DG Research and Innovation, my own old home turf. And why do I mention that? Because we have new instruments on the table, and Manfredo is perfectly aware of that. On the research side, the new proposal on the framework program, which is currently at 100 billion. And we have the new external instruments on the table, the development and neighborhood instruments combined, including FPI, if I'm not mistaken. So these are packages. And we are looking also at synergies between these packages. That's done from 2 sides, from the DG RTD and DEFCO. So we're pretty active in that respect, and I'll come to smart specialization in a minute. But why do I start by that? Because in the inter-service process, and I apologize, but I'm known with the intricacies of internal programming. We've made actually two proposals to our colleagues, my old colleagues, namely to let's say, promote more the international dimension of the New Horizon Europe framework program, to the extent that we have proposed a specific program for Africa to the tune of 0.7%, which reflects a budget of 700 million. Why? Well, actually because of all the predecessors on this panel who have mentioned policy documents on Africa and who have identified the relevance at political level of policy towards Africa. Secondly, we've also made some proposals in terms of capacity development that I think is a shared responsibility. That's not only DEFCO, it also goes hand in hand with scientific excellence. So we've proposed a new initiative which is called the African Research Council, which is supposed to be for continental Africa. So these are just some highlights, costly highlights, I must say, but that we have put on the table. And they've been taken up also by our cabinet. On the subject today, so what I actually represent here is our ACP program on research and innovation. ACP, Africa, Caribbean and Pacific. It has a history. Let me depart from the history. Let me get you some fresh information that is interesting for today's topic. Our program in DEFCO used to be operated on the basis of cost proposals for Africa, Caribbean and Pacific combined, and they were based in thematic areas. So the problem that you got over time was that you got very good, let's say, single proposals, but there was not much coherence. And on top of that, with that kind of approach, you started to imitate a little framework program, which is not the right approach. Also because what Adam Tyson mentioned earlier on, the framework program in itself is open to the world. So in that sense, it is accessible to any player worldwide. So when I joined DEFCO, my colleagues had already started to prepare a different approach to this program, and that I would like to explain to you in 5 minutes, and there's a link with the topic today. Namely, to move away from straightforward research funding to teams, let's say, let me give an example, teams from 2 countries in Africa and 1 country in Europe, so the usual multinational consortia, to something which is a little bit more systemic. And where does it become systemic? It becomes systemic if you give countries the possibility to develop their national innovation policy in a way that is structured to their own needs. And I think that was a very good idea, and I pushed that onward. So we got the agreement of the management of DEFCO, which is very important. Otherwise, you don't move on. And what does it mean in practice? It means that our program, which was just adopted last week by the European Development Committee, so fortunately the member states have agreed to it. I had already spent time in the ACP ambassadors meeting. They agreed on a regional approach. What are we going to do? We're going to create, as from 19, so we talk here about work programs which are 18-20. This is true for DEFCO. It's actually also true for RTD because their work programs also cover 18-20 until you go into the new instruments, as from 21, of course. So in these 2-3 years, we have an approach that will be based on 2 main items. We will introduce what we call an innovation fund, which will be able to fund innovation pilots by proposals by countries. I say countries because it will be national. So there will not be a precondition that they have to combine with Europeans or they have to combine with other countries. So it's not the multinational dimension has disappeared, which I personally think is a good idea, because the ownership increases. Now, you would say, why innovation pilots? What would they be? What could they present? Well, then I will not repeat what Maffini said, because Maffini just gave a nice overview on the policy documents that have been prepared. Let me just highlight the topic that was retained by the Abidjan summit in November. Namely, the keywords were youth and skills. Youth and skills because there's a demographic component, and skills because you need the connection with the labor market and industrial development. So these keywords, you will find them back in our program. For instance, just to give you one reference that appeals to everybody, digital skills is really high on the agenda. But in the end, I would say it will depend on the country. Now, you should never do this in isolation, not as a separate, whatever serious the intentions of the program are. So what we have done, we are going to embed this in what we call a policy support facility. This policy support facility is aimed at facilitating a review and creation of national innovation policies. That in itself is not new. What is new is that we have regionalized it. So our programs will be for Africa, for the Caribbean, and for the Pacific. They will not be combined anymore. We have regionalized it because, for internal reasons, if you read carefully the mandate for the post-Cotonou negotiations, you will see that the approach of the Commission is to go to regional ownership and regional negotiations. So we have taken a bit, it's a little bit a precursor, if you like, in a thematic area on this new negotiating situation. And to be honest, the ACP ambassadors in Brussels agreed to that, so that was good for us. So we'll have 3 different funds and 3 different regions and 3 parallel procedures. Now, I also have to be honest to myself and to the audience here. We did not invent this policy support facility. It is copied from Horizon 2020 when it was developed. Mainly with in the back of their mind, they had the situation in Eastern Europe and the new accession countries, and they wanted to facilitate the integration, especially towards the framework program. So you need to look at strengths and weaknesses of the national research innovation situation. So that approach, we have borrowed that, to put it diplomatically, and we will apply that to Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. Now, then you come to the point, what will be in it? Well, 2 things. First, this embedding of the policy will be based on mixed expert groups. So depending on the region, there will be European experts and African experts, or there will be European experts and Caribbean experts and so forth. And it will be initiated by the country who is interested to go through this process. So it will be demand-driven. And I think if I listen carefully to what Manasseh said in the earlier session, it's actually a good example that he put in terms of the situation of Rwanda. There are other countries. Why do I say this? Because you have to see these systems in consecutively. So if you are able to do, or if you would like to do a review of your national innovation policy or your national innovation strategy, and this is where smart specialization comes in, because you can integrate that in that review, then on the basis of that review, it's much easier to identify pilots that you would like to test in the market as an implementation or operationalization of this innovation strategy. So we read first the policy support facility linked to the innovation fund. Of course, the funding rates will be slightly different. I mean, the policy support facility will be 100% funding, and probably the pilot activities will be funded at 85% to get also some co-ownership of the countries concerned. So this is what we will be implementing, most likely from beginning of 19. And also to make a link, final link, and not to take too much time, what is also important, I think in a way it was mentioned by Manasseh, but I would like to repeat that. In the development countries, we work with indicative programs, national indicative programs. And of course, and it was mentioned, research, innovation, technology is not the highest priority on the list. We understand that. That's poverty eradication, it's infrastructure development, it is health, it is agriculture, what have you. So normally you get these priorities. But where in a country it's considered that you should do more on innovation policy or you should do more on stimulating technology uptake, those agencies, and there are many of them, they also have the opportunity to put national programs into the indicative planning. And after all, that's development money going into these activities. So I would make a plea. It's a limited plea today, but I think we will need a wider audience for that. A plea to put more national research program efforts in the DEFCO, in the development indicative programs, and that would also help a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like now to give the floor to Nona. Maybe you could say a couple of words to frame what your service does for the benefit of the participants who are not so familiar with lingo.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So, what is the Service for Foreign Policy Instruments about? It's a commissioned service that is very, very closely linked to the European External Action Service, and that has the same boss, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs of the European Union, Federica Mogherini. So the idea of the Service for Foreign Policy Instruments is really to translate the EU's foreign policy into action. And that is what the partnership instrument is about. So allow me first to just say a few words. Thanks. Say a few words on the partnership instrument, and then I'll dive more closely into the other side. Into the subject of today, which is smart specialization. So just to mention that the partnership instrument was created in 2014, and this is really something very new for the European Union because its idea, its mandate is to promote the EU's and mutual interests. So this is not about development cooperation, it's about mutual interests, it's about peer-to-peer learning, about exchanging knowledge and experts. So we have teams around the world working on the partnership instrument, because the partnership instrument also has a global reach. We started out working with the strategic partner countries, so such as Brazil, when the EU and Brazil signed a strategic partnership, but then we expanded gradually towards more other middle-income countries, those that play an increasingly important role on the world political scene, and with whom the EU wants to cooperate. So these are the 4 objectives of the partnership instrument. So they are very, very wide, and smart specialization really fits into several of these, and which is also the purpose of projects that are funded through the partnership instrument, because we have a very small budget. The budget is only 1 billion over this financial perspective, so around 150 million euros a year, but to cover all of these 4 objectives and in the worldwide. So let me just highlight the second and the third objective, which are really closely linked to the smart specialization, which is really about the second, about the external projection of the EU's internal policies. So where we would like to promote the internal policies of Europe 2020, so smart, inclusive, and sustainable growth. So also promoting influencing the other partners' agendas on on international negotiations, for example, or also influencing the regulatory framework of the partner countries. The third objective is really to try to promote trade, business, and investment opportunities for the EU SMEs. So this is also where smart specialization can play a big role. The fourth objective is about promoting the EU's visibility and awareness raising on the EU worldwide, including also academic cooperation, where we provide a contribution to Erasmus+, for example, covering the countries that are no longer covered through development cooperation, but where we also fund academic cooperation through the Jean Monnet shares, the EU Centers of Excellence, like the speaker before, Bruce Williams from Australia. These are our programming priorities for the last 2 years of this financial perspectives of the partnership instrument. So these are really the priorities we want to work on in 18, 19, 20, and in the cross-cutting issues you will see there's innovation. We have a focus on innovation. We operate through annual action programs. I will not go too much into this, but what I wanted to highlight is that we have a very close cooperation with DG NEAR, and we use there the TAIEX facility. So this was mentioned by the colleague from Tunisia, where we can also make use of our member state expertise to have workshops and to really enhance this peer-to-peer learning and this experts speaking to each other, which is very much appreciated in the countries where we work. So let me just now come to and focus on smart specialization, and I'll just focus on one of our projects which has a component on smart specialization, which is the International Urban Cooperation Program. So this currently has a budget of 20 million, works with different countries in the Americas and in Asia, and where we work very closely together. I mean, just as Adam Tyson was mentioning this morning, the importance of the partnership instrument, its mandate is really to turn the EU's foreign policy into action, but it's also to promote the sectorial priorities of the European Commission, of the European Union. So we work very, very closely together with the different DGs of the Commission. So for this program, the first component, we work with DG Regio, the DG that works on regional cooperation, which is really about city-to-city pairing on sustainable urban cooperation, where we work with many countries, many cities all around the world. The second component is about the rollout of the Global Covenant of Mayors. So there was this initiative, a European initiative, also launched, of course, by DG Regio, which was about the European Covenant of Mayors, and which merged with the Bloomberg initiative on the Compact of Mayors, which is really about the implementation of the Paris Declaration, of the support of the fight against climate change. So where we are trying to roll this out in countries in the Americas and in Asia again, and where we work, of course, very closely with DG NR, working on energy, DG Climate, and with the very strong scientific and methodological support of the JRC. And then let me now come to the third component, which is about region-to-region cooperation, and which is only with Latin America in this phase of the program, so which is really trying to promote smart specialization. Under this component, we're setting up 20 pairings between regions of Latin America and European regions based on the smart specialization strategy methodology defined by the European Union. So this is really very early days for us. We've only set up the first pairings with regions from Chile, from Argentina, from Mexico, from Brazil, and from Peru, with, of course, the support of the JRC and DG Regio, where these regions first set out their priorities, of course, working with all the stakeholders, because this is using the smart specialization methodology, and then where we set out, so this is really, I'm not going to go into details into this, this is just your normal smart specialization methodology, which has been applied, let's say, a little bit customized also to these pairings, and where we have really tried to build on existing regions' interests already for smart specialization. So, for example, I mean, the Mexican representatives mentioned from Colima this morning, we have a pairing between Colima and Extremadura in Spain, so where they have identified as priorities to work together on ICT, on agro-food or on tourism, and where they will now start working together on these priorities, and also try to set up the business partnerships, which is again linking to the objective of the partnership instrument to promote business, trade, and investment opportunities. So there is a competitive call for proposal to look for the interest of European regions, and then there are several meetings. So this program, with its very limited funds, only tries to support the enabling environment, to try to really to set up ways to promote the smart specialization strategy, but also try to promote these business partnerships and to come up also with pilot projects. But the program will not be able to fund the pilot projects, but we're trying also to set up conversations with funding agencies. I mean, just also as the colleagues mentioned this morning, that it's important to include banks and funding agencies. And then we'll try to disseminate the lessons learned from these pairings and also try to make them sustainable. So just let me, well, these are just a few examples. I think it's very difficult to read, but I think you will disseminate the presentation. Let me just go to the lessons learned. So I think we have raised a lot of expectations with this program. So we're trying to look at a second phase of the program, where it would be very important for us to have your feedback from the ground and to work, of course, together with the colleagues from the European External Action Service and from the different services of the European Commission to look at whether it's interesting to have a second phase and what should be different, for example. So we're also going through an evaluation of the current program. I think many of the issues have already been mentioned this morning. It's also about bringing together the different levels of governance, bringing together the different levels of government. We have also been working together with the national authorities to define these priorities, to try to influence the national level, and that the national level is not forgotten in these pairings. But this has also conducted a little bit of a time lag and some delays in the actual implementation of these pairings. We have been finding difficulties to find funding for the pilot activities. So that's, I think, a big issue. And we're only really setting up the business partnerships now. I think there have been a few partnerships, for example, looking at capacity building on how to enhance export capacities to the EU to comply with the EU rules. So just a few lessons learned from the start of this very promising project, and which for the moment is only in Latin America. So the next steps, we'll continue on these pairings, and then we'll also have, as I mentioned before, a meeting in Brussels with all the relevant stakeholders to look at the second phase of the ongoing program. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nona. Marek, please.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in this environment in JRC and seeing how the whole concept is growing and developing. Let me just concentrate on smart specialization as such. As we, in order to have innovation really succeed, you need to have a market. And I think the uptake by cohesion policy after the conceptual development by Dominique Faure and colleagues, scientific colleagues in research, it happened that we have taken this concept in DG Regio in order to implement with all possible risk that it's not yet fantastically worked out, no priorities and so on. So we took it, and I think the exercise of learning by doing, which we were going through, together with feedback to researchers in Joint Research Center, setting up S3 platform and academics, led us to the situation that in 2018, I think there is the very clearly mainstreamed in our regions. We have 276 regions. So let me just say some lessons on this and what we are going to do further in the regional development policy in view of smart specialization development. So this is definitely implementing smart specialization strategies across EU gave us the framework of strategic thinking on innovation and the same nomenclature, the same language we can communicate. There is definitely one of the elements which was basis for the discussion in the scientific community was the fragmentation of our research area and duplication of efforts. This is something that led to prioritizing public research and innovation investments. And from our perspective, it wasn't only about the prioritizing public research and investments, but it was about relevance of this research and innovation investments for economic development of regions, so building competitive advantage. So this is something that it cannot be undermined, because the values we have invested in this concept are quite considerable, and this has as well had an impact on the uptake. We made it conditional to get access of the EU funds for research and innovation. 40 billion plus from European Regional Development plus about 20 billion from the national authorities. Altogether, the budget of 60 billion euro just purely for smart specialization in the period 2014-2020. With a clear objective that we are having the new-to-market products, and we are helping startups to develop in Europe and creating jobs. And this is the beginning. So what we've learned from all this exercise we went through. First of all, definitely just knowledge creation is not going to develop your region if it's not relevant. So it's good that you develop, you are a researcher, you have excellent science, it's very good for the community, but if it doesn't go into the marketplace, is not used in the services or products, it's not really much helpful for the economic development. Second, the regional institution, and I think it was mentioned as well previously, the ownership or leadership, the institutional leadership is extremely important. If you don't have it, or you don't have the ownership, enough capacity, and it goes vertically from European, national, regional to local, and horizontally through different ministries talking to each other, but then you will never succeed. So this is something that is extremely important, to have the body responsible for smart specialization strategy in place. Monitoring and evaluation to be in place to measure performance. This is something which is always very difficult to get in order to really have the possibility to revise if you are going in the right direction and if you are implementing what you planned. So monitoring and evaluation is still very much a challenge for everyone, and public policy makers and developers of projects and programs, very much so. And I think this one is the key. Real functioning of entrepreneurial discovery process. And here it's not about organizing workshop twice, 3 times a year, but having this a permanent process, and exactly the variety of entrepreneurial discovery process differs from country to country, from the institutional setup, from the industrial setup. Different organizations can play the role. It depends very much on the level of development, economic development, but as well institutional development. You can do it through organizing the growth fora. You can do it from innovation breakfast. You can do it through different ways, through clusters. The main point is that enterprises, together with researchers, are collaborating on a permanent basis. Another element very important, which is this process and leads to inspiration for reforming regional and in national research innovation systems. We see from this 4 or 5 years that this interaction between businesses and researchers and facilitated by the public administration, if public administration is able and capable to read what is happening, translates as well to reforms in institutions, in reforms in the fiscal reforms in the organizational setup. Latest example I can give you in Cyprus right now. They passed through the law that you can create spin-offs from universities. Just an example, very concrete, very outcome of all this exercise. Industrial transition. We are getting into the phase of Industry 4.0, just very much extremely important, the dynamics of development. So smart specialization not a static. It is in a very dynamic. It's linked to very dynamic business environment and policy development, which needs to meet the business and research needs. International cooperation, I left it at the end because this is something that is still an element which we are very closely now trying to develop across regions in Europe, across 276, with the hope that we might link into international parts. So once we have the dots of smart specialization across Europe, we are linking them in interregional innovation investments with the hope as well that they have a scope of value chain which can be integrated later and with other international initiatives. So we build on what we have developed. We think it was a very good exercise. I think it really brought on the agenda the prioritization of investments, aligning the business strategic investments with public strategic investments. It's not perfect. It still needs to be fine-tuned and further developed, but this business and research collaboration is extremely important with the public administration, which still needs to upgrade skills and in order to be able to facilitate and really read what is happening at the grassroots. Civil society, the users dimension, very often very neglected, but this is exactly where where still gives this inclusiveness character of our policy. So we are going to continue with the smart specialization strategy, giving them rather fine-tuning into the very much economic transformation and more dynamism with the view of helping the societies to change into and adapt to the industrial 4.0, to the new challenges that we are having. So we have the policy framework for the new Smarter Europe as we are going to use, and if you can see, these are all the documents of the policies of the European Commission. But just to highlight the element, one is exactly the place-based part, which is very important for us, territorial dimension, specific for each. The second one is DG Research, very much part. All of this is developed by the Commission, so it's all services working. But a new European agenda, which is very much highlighting the business research need and the fact that the science, we are excellent in science, but not really putting this into the use of businesses and society. The new industrial policy strategy is taking into account the automation, robotization, digitalization element. Very much important startup and scale up. We are creating startups, but we are not able to keep them in Europe. And the new element in the smart specialization, we are bringing the new element which we knew from the very beginning, the skills dimension. The skills dimension which we incorporate into the smart specialization right now. And higher education, entrepreneurial universities, and I mentioned the Cyprus example of spin-offs in universities. So very shortly, it must be all in the context, in the general context. We are in Europe, where we have very few countries which are which are leading the scientific excellence. They are actually the main target group of Horizon 2020, but at the same time we have main target group, which is in the lower corner, which is in the cohesion policy. So at the same time, we as identified in we have very clearly excellent research in 1/3 of highly valued public citations in public scientific publications in the world are coming from EU. However, we still are lagging behind in comparison to US, Japan, and Korea in terms of business research, in terms of unicorns, in terms of venture capital. So there's lots of work to do in business research. In business research, this is something that we exactly point out for cohesion countries, because they are where they're lagging behind. And you see that as well, it was the slowdown in the countries which are the leaders in economic development in Europe. So we have here very much need to do something about business research. And in terms of diversity of European territorial innovation ecosystem, you can see very, very clearly that you have very few, but leading innovation ecosystems were more developed, and this is very good that they are creating knowledge. The problem is with the fusion of the knowledge to less developed parts of Europe. So, having integrated a view of all what we've been developing, it's not on research innovation as such only, it's on economic transformation, it's on changing the way we work, mentalities, mindset, in view as well to energy transition, in view of digitalization, in view of Industry 4.0, which is extremely important, influencing the skills dimension and the jobs of the future. So in 10 years, the jobs will look completely different. The vocational training, the reskilling, upgrading, it's extremely important, together with the needs identified through entrepreneurial discovery process. This comes now from our pilot on interregional innovation investment, for example, in 3D printing. It comes from this process very much, which you cannot identify from any studies. The needs for people who know how to certify the processes of additive manufacturing, who can validate the processes. This is complete lack of skills in this dimension. So the entrepreneurial discovery process and smart specialization can play extremely important role to really make the grassroots needs of the skills. And then interregional cooperation in value chain. So this is something which is now getting more and more on the picture, the global value chains and connectivity with the global value chains, the niches, the niche elements of our smart specialization, how they can be upgraded, moved up the value chains from different parts in the global context. And as well, here might be well that the other parts in the world where have the niches of smart specialization can integrate in the global value chain together with European value chains. So I will just show you this, because this is the whole setup for the 2021-2027. ERDF is definitely going to continue with smart specialization. We are going broader as a tool for economic transformation. And then we have the other directly managed programs, which I think should take into account the whole development of smart specialization topics, because it has been proven that in bottom up, it really reads what are the needs at the grassroots of our businesses and our researchers in local communities. So I will not go through these details. Each of these programs have the international dimension and access of third parties into it. It can be well further developed and investigated if someone is more interested. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marek, for this very interesting presentation. I think it's good to have the first lessons learned. I think these are elements that can be interesting for what is being done anywhere in the world, called in different ways or packaged in different ways, but the principles are certainly valid. Thank you for putting on the table a number of other challenges. I think we have food for thought for many other conferences here. Before opening the floor, sorry, if time is short, I would like to build on something that Nona presented on the way forward, what's coming up with the follow-up to the first experience of implementing smart specialization, and ask a question of the two gentlemen on my right. Based on what you heard today, the experiences that the participants and the speakers shared, how do you think that smart specialization could become an element of our external policy? If so, and how? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Emanuela. Well, the point that I would like to clarify is precisely that particularly in the region I'm dealing with, which is Latin America and the Caribbean, but this is certainly also applicable to other regions of the world. We are observing an evolution of the economy of the countries towards a more advanced level of development, and therefore to the fact that those countries are moving also towards a different economic model. For instance, in Latin America, one of the big issues is economic diversification. Many countries are still dependent on one type of production or a few types of production. So diversification, productivity, research and innovation are key words for the modernization and diversification of those economies. So I think that in a context in which, as I said during my presentation, we are gradually moving from a relation that was classically development trade to a relation which is much more diversified, which is first of all political, but also economic in the wider meaning trade, investment, and continuous interchange among business. Smart specialization can become one of the keys for these closer economic relations, and also one of the various drivers of economic development towards a higher development of the economies.
Very short, because I think Manfredo summarized it quite eloquently. I would simply add that smart specialization as such is a tool. It's not an objective. It's a tool. It's a methodology. So it helps to achieve something else, which is economic development, industrial development, specialization, whether at regional or national level.
Thank you. Do we have time for one question? One question. Is there one question?
There are two.
There are two.
Too many.
Too many. Well, two short questions. Short question. Mike.
He was first.
Sorry, I can hardly see you. There's a gentleman there, and
There's a mic.
yes, good. Yeah.
Thank you for organizing this very useful conference. Because I introduce myself. I'm Vietnamese student. I'm doing my last year PhD in Schema Business School, where we focus on knowledge, technology, organization.
Question.
Yep. The question is that because I try to introduce why I introduce that, because I link to what the Maris just presentation, and then I have a question. So because my work I do I propose the regional alignment concept. By doing that, I measure that the technological advantage in the region, in each region in French, in over 20 years. And I also measure the scientific technology, scientific expertise in the region over the years. And so what I want to say that from that, I look at the knowledge creation point of view rather than specialization, talking about from policy point of view. And because in doing that, I collect in French EPO patent data, and I track
What's your question?
Just give me a few minutes. Yeah. And because doing that, I need to track of the single data from patent data and publication on region in French. So my question is that in terms of data, in Euro Commission, do you have the patent data at the inventor level? So this is the first question. And because I tried to propose my paper to propose that the region, they have alignment between science, technology, and in regard of the technological and scientific advantage in the region, they can create the knowledge platform, or they can create different option choice for inventor to search new knowledge beyond their boundary. And that's in my I mean, what I have done, and I faced with many difficulties for the data on inventor. Especially, I look at an inventor information for all European countries.
Okay, thank you. Second, I collect the two questions, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of quick questions. One is on really Africa and European Commission and this smart specialization. The other one is on, of course, what is not being talked about here, slightly relevant but important, science and trickle down. So, earlier on, Adam Tyson talked about the need for European Commission to be in phase with and cooperation with Africa, and why that is important. And he also made a couple of mention of challenges that exist, things like low spending, lack of capital in that region. So I was listening to actually these summaries just a short while ago, listening to Ms. Dupre and the partnership instrument as an example. And then I was asking myself, okay, in this partnership instrument, especially when she was talking about urban cooperation, the IUC, and that involves Latin America and Asia. And I'm sitting back here and I'm asking myself, so how is it that it doesn't involve Africa? I know it's nobody's fault up there, but maybe somebody can allude to that. And of course, a follow-up comment on this would be, how are these partnerships determined? And what is the Commission doing to actually put Tyson's words into implementation? Okay. That's one question. The other question is what we haven't really talked here, but I think something that we all need to collectively always come to face with. Earlier on, there was a comment about India as an example of
India.
Yeah, India, as an example of disparity in distribution of capital. So we're told 5% of Indians own 50% of Indian capital. Okay, and it seemed there was also a reverse observation on that, in which 50% of Indians own, I don't remember what the figure was, whether it was 5%. And so I'm sitting back here and I'm saying, okay, smart specialization is one of the new approaches that we're taking. The reason we take up these approaches is not because, I think it was put very well, science, technology, research, and innovation are not ends in themselves. They are a means towards improving our societies. And so I ask myself, okay, smart specialization, did somebody check to make sure that, let's say, if you put smart specialization in a region like India, I hate to mention the country, but it's an example of what is happening in other countries. Did somebody check to make sure that smart specialization is not even going to dwindle that 5% of who owns everything to even a smaller figure? Does it get better? And very quickly, hypothetical thinking. If we had a scenario in which you had a theoretical country that is classless, would smart specialization or other programs that we engage to use science and technology to build our societies ensure that actually that society remains classless, or at least it doesn't get worse and create classes? I know these are social political questions that I'm asking. I'm actually a physical scientist, I'm a physicist, and so I'm not a politician. But the reason we sit here and talk about all this is so our societies can get better. If we improve 5% to 10%, that's good. But if we keep the 5% owning everything and we give them the science tools to even get greater, that's not good. So,
thank you. Thank you. Who of the colleagues would like to attempt a reply to these questions? Yeah.
There is, it has to do with the intelligence of the public administration as well, of the territories, yeah? And how they can help in data gathering and data and the information sharing within the business and research community, or triple helix, or whatever we call. And one is definitely the publicly available data. You have your European Patent Office, and you can find, you can search. This is clearly one. Another is the patents which are sometimes not even disclosed, and this you have the tacit knowledge in the enterprises, and this exercise through entrepreneurial discovery process can reveal the potential of these patents in the region. And I will give you an example of Oulu region. There was the Nokia issue, and in Oulu in Finland, they have university. The people lost jobs because of clear crisis and loss of the Nokia market. What Nokia did together with the University of Oulu, they actually opened up the whole patents database they had on the shelves. There were more than 2,500, and made it available for people who lost jobs. Actually, right now, what is the situation that Oulu region is really growing very fast. It's dynamic. It's completely an example of good economic transition without having the huge company like Nokia. But the knowledge so it's about revealing the potential of patents. And this is one. The second, I would like to refer to what you are saying, polarization. Indeed, there is an issue of if you look at the now potential automation, robotization, industrial 4.0, there's clearly going into the direction that you will have people with a very skilled jobs. Very well paid, because they need to have very sophisticated and very search skills, At the same time, you will have the community of people who might lose jobs. The smart specialization, I think, because they have embedded the element of inclusiveness, can help in this process that the people who are in the risk of losing jobs through automation or robotization, they are incorporated into the process of developing new areas of opportunities where they can find the jobs. Otherwise, it will happen anyway. It will happen anyway, and the polarization will be even bigger with the elitistic approach of these groups, which will keep everything for themselves. So this participatory part of the smart specialization gives a chance that this inclusiveness will happen. No?
Thank you, Mari.
I will just comment on the questions on why Africa is not included in this International Urban Cooperation Program. Just to mention that the second component, which is about the rollout of the Global Covenant of Mayors, is part of different programs for different geographic regions. So DG NEAR funds a similar program for the Eastern Partnership countries and the Western Balkans, and DG DEVCO funds a similar program for African countries. That's on the Global Covenant of Mayors. I know DG DEVCO is also very closely looking at setting up a program on supporting local authorities pairings also, which would also then cover African, Caribbean and Pacific countries. So I think the partnership instrument is really a complementary instrument, and it should not intervene where there are still many other European Union funds available, just as the Development Cooperation Instrument and the EDF for Africa.
You want to add anything on questions? No? Roberto? No?
And then maybe on what are we doing to respond to Adam? So the proposal of the European Commission is to have one big instrument for external relations, so which the intention is to enhance synergies and that there would be fewer overlaps and better complementarity and better coordination. I mean, that's the proposal that is on the table for external relations.
Good. Thank you for your patience. Sorry for having taken more time than foreseen, and thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers.